Coming up today on LinkedIn News Live. Hailed as the digital answer to collectibles, non-fungible tokens are taking the art world by storm. But what are they, and why are they going for millions of dollars? We chat with EY's global blockchain leader on whether NFTs are here to stay or a bubble about to burst. Plus, a historical night at the Oscars, we'll tell you why, coming up next. Hello, I'm Devin Banerjee, and welcome back to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. Today, we're talking the rise of NFTs, but first, let's take a quick look at the top headlines. Biden is set to raise taxes on the wealthiest. The United States will help India in its COVID fight, and the Oscars Best Director makes history. Let's take a deeper dive into that last story and what it means for those in the industry. Chloe Zhao became the first woman of color to win Best Director at Sunday's Academy Awards. The 39-year-old Chinese-born US-based filmmaker who was nominated for Nomadland also became only the second woman ever to win a directing Oscar. To discuss, let's chat with Katie Carroll, Senior Managing Editor at LinkedIn News. Katie, I have to admit, normally I do watch the Oscars, but this year I did not. For those like me, catch us up on some of the takeaways from last night.
Yeah, it was definitely a different kind of ceremony and show than I think people are used to seeing, given COVID. It was in Union Station in LA, which was also an interesting change. One of the most noteworthy things about the event last night was, as you said, Chloe Zhao became the first woman of color to win Best Director at the Oscars, and only the second woman ever in the ceremony's 93-year history, following Catherine Bigelow in 2010. The Oscars have come under fire in recent years for lack of diversity among nominees, especially in 2015 and 2016. There were no non-white nominees in the acting categories, which led to widespread protests on social media and the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite. So this year, there were definitely signs of improvement. 9 of the 20 nominees in acting categories were for non-white performers, and there were several other firsts across the night as well.
So several firsts, as you said, some improvement. What's the reaction been, and why do people view this as so significant for the Oscars and for the film industry?
Over the past several years, there have been efforts by the Academy to add new diversity measures to its ranks and to better recognize a lot of the work that has potentially been overlooked by the Academy in the past.
Now, over the past decade, I would say, Katie, increasingly the talk around these film and television awards has been about the streaming platforms. What are some takeaways about how the streaming platforms performed in last night's Oscars?
Netflix had a great night. Netflix, just in the one event, nearly doubled the total number of Oscars that it has ever received. It had its first nomination in 2013, and now has scored 15 wins since that time. It also had 36 nominations across 17 films, which is the most of any distributor, including the traditional studios, and was followed up by Disney, which also has had a strong streaming platform as well.
Wow, so a huge rise in the streaming platforms at these awards. I'm curious, Katie, as we think about a year from now, what are you going to be watching over the course of this year in film, and what do you think we'll see at next year's Oscars? Any surprises?
I'm just hoping we can all get back into movie theaters by next year. I think it was a particularly surreal period of time, just because so much of the traffic that film companies are used to getting was not possible, or the entire ecosystem had to be rethought to meet audiences where they were, which was in their houses. So we'll see how that shifts in coming years, and what that does mean for streaming services and other non-traditional players. But yeah, I think the Oscars changed this year and are going to continue to change over time.
Absolutely. It's going to be an interesting year. Katie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Katie Carroll, Senior Managing Editor at LinkedIn News. Now, for more stories like this, be sure to check out the news module to the right of your LinkedIn feed. Or if you're on mobile, click into that search box. It started as an internet hobby among crypto nerds, but it has become the latest investment craze hitting the mainstream. NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, are taking the art and collectible worlds by storm. Players are buying and selling content for millions of dollars. But what are they exactly, and what has spurred this market to balloon by as much as $1.5 billion so far this year? Joining us now to dig deep into this is Paul Brody. He's global blockchain leader at EY. Paul, it's so great to have you with us because I'm going to be honest, for some people, NFTs are a bit difficult to grasp. Paul, if someone grabbed you on the street and said, hey, you're Paul Brody, what exactly is an NFT? How would you describe it to them?
So NFT stands for non-fungible token. And what fungible just means is kind of the same. So money, dollar bills are fungible. You don't care which dollar it is, it's a dollar and you can spend it on anything. But a non-fungible token means a blockchain-based token, a crypto asset token that's unique. So if you have a single one of those items, it can never be replicated, it can never be duplicated on the blockchain, and there's only one. So they're perfect for collectibles and pieces of art because there are only one or only limited number of editions.
So it sounds really interesting, and blockchain technology has been around for years now. Why are NFTs taking off right now? What is it about this moment?
Well, that is, I think, is maybe much harder to speculate on. It's so funny, we spent 2 or 3 years here at EY working on non-fungible tokens because we believe they're incredibly important for industrial applications. If you think about a car or a truck or a piece of warehousing capacity, a warehouse in San Francisco is not the same as a warehouse in Dallas. So you want to represent those on the blockchain as unique items. So we spend all this time thinking about non-fungible tokens as an industrial asset, and all of a sudden people want to talk about them as art and collectibles. So we were taken by surprise, but I think it's part of the broader kind of explosion of investing and speculation that's driven by people having spent a lot of time over the last year saving up money instead of spending it. They got money to spend and they're thinking about places to invest it.
Yeah, very interesting. And we'll get into some of those other drivers behind this trend in a moment. Paul, you mentioned industrial applications. That sounds really interesting to me because in the mainstream, we've seen NFTs applied to art and collectibles, as I mentioned. What kinds of assets are they applicable to or appropriate for?
So anytime you have an asset that's unique and different from its other assets, you want to think about modeling it as a non-fungible token. So art is perfect, right? And what you can do with a non-fungible token is you can say, I'm going to have a class of art tokens, right? And let's say I'm going to have a limited edition, so I'll produce only 100 of these tokens, and each one will be a numbered token. And non-fungible tokens, they can be themselves the item of value, or they can point you to something you own in the real world, like a piece of art or an extraordinarily valuable pair of sneakers. But it's a unique item either by itself or part of a series.
Now, you mentioned, I think, the word speculation. We have to talk about prices here, Paul. On one end of the spectrum, people are saying NFTs are really the poster child for an everything bubble right now among assets. On the other end of the spectrum, people say, look, this is just a free market setting prices. What's your take on some of the prices we've seen NFTs going for lately?
So there's no question we're in a bit of a kind of speculative everything type of bubble, right? That's not to say that NFTs aren't here for good. I think they are here for good. They serve an incredibly useful purpose in industrial applications, in art applications. But the problem is that there is and there always will be an infinite supply of limited edition collectibles. And just like with the art world, it takes time for us to figure out what's going to survive the test of time, right? In the millions of pieces of art that are produced every year, which ones will we look back and say, oh, 2020, that was this amazing painting was defined by the year. We might not know that for 50 or 100 years.
Yeah, Paul, let's take a moment to say hi to some members viewing us in the stream. Christina from Washington, D.C., Ahmet from Turkey, Luciano from New Jersey, Amy from Washington. Thank you all for joining us. Remember, if you have questions for Paul, you can put them in the stream, and I'll do my best to pose some of them to him during this conversation. Michael in the stream says he thinks NFTs are here to stay as well. Rosa asks, what is driving these high prices, which I think you just touched on, Paul. I'm curious, though, given that we've seen these high prices, do you think protections or improvements are needed to make NFTs more appropriate and usable, user-friendly for the masses?
That's a really good question. I think the toughest thing is that many people don't really know what it is that they're buying when they buy an NFT, and they're not completely clear. Is it just a digital item itself, right? Or is it a link to a physical painting or a physical asset? And so I think a lot of education would actually be useful so that people understand what they're buying. I also think there's some big misconceptions, right, about the value of how blockchains work. Yes, an NFT is unique. And if you have, say, a non-fungible token that represents an animation, right? If that animation is digital, people can and will copy that animation. They will see it, they will use it, but that doesn't mean that they own it. And so that's a good example of the kind of different slices of understanding about how NFTs work that are going to be part of this education market.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned duplication just now. We've actually seen that rise as a bit of a danger in recent weeks. Do you think some of these issues will be smoothed out?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Investors are going to become more sophisticated over time. They will understand some of the limitations on the NFT functionality, and they'll also start to understand, where they can actually use those NFTs and where they point to something that's virtual or something that's a link to the world of the physical. And I'm also hopeful that we'll start to see the ability of people to take non-fungible tokens that have an established value, right? Not just something that's been bought once at a high price, but something that's had an established value over time. And they will be able to use it as collateral, as investment in the decentralized finance ecosystem. And so NFTs, even though they're investments and in many cases they're pieces of art, they could also become useful financial instruments over time.
Paul, we are getting so many questions in the stream for you. People are very, very interested in this topic. Let's take a question from Erwin. Erwin asks, if I am an artist, how would I even get my art to be an NFT? As a creator, how can I create an NFT and sell it and kind of take advantage of this market right now?
There's a spectacular number of services that are out there that will allow you to set up your NFTs and put them out on the market. And you want to think through a couple of things before you do that. The first is, what exactly am I selling? Am I selling just a digital token? Am I selling the rights of ownership or copyright to that particular non-fungible token? And how am I going to make sure that if somebody buys that token, that I deliver the actual product if it's linked to something in the real world? The last thing I would say that's really important for people to think about, and truthfully, there's probably many more, but one other thing I would think it's important to think about is, what is the marketplace into which I am selling these non-fungible tokens? In the world of blockchain, there are lots and lots of different blockchains. Some of them, like Ethereum, are worth hundreds of billions of dollars. They process millions of transactions a day. And if your item has value, it can be resold and resold. Others are small, they're private. They may not stand the test of time, the blockchain itself, never mind the art.
Yeah. Paul, you mentioned NFTs are here to stay. I'm curious why you think that's the case. I mean, we see trends come and go, fads come and go, even investment, trends come and go. Why do you think they're here to stay?
They're here to stay because blockchain technology, blockchain payments, blockchain assets are here to stay, right? So we're about 10, 11 years into the blockchain era, and we've proven that these assets, primarily Bitcoin and Ethereum, are worth upwards of $1 trillion. They generate over 1 million transactions a day. We have at EY well over 200 clients that we do financial statement audits who are holding material amounts of crypto and digital assets. We're doing implementations of this stuff for hundreds of companies. That's not the kind of thing that you see when it's just a fad. Now, prices of individual items are going to go up and down, and some things will absolutely be fads, but the underlying technology of blockchain, the idea that you can have fungible and non-fungible assets, those are, I think, are permanent ideas that will have a huge long-term impact on how we run the economy, how we run financial markets, and how we run the art market as well.
Paul, some of our members in the stream are hearing you mention these terms, cryptocurrency and the underlying technology of blockchain. Diana in the stream brings up a good point about cryptocurrency. She asks whether the US dollar, you think, will no longer be the currency of greatest importance in the future. What are your thoughts on that?
This is the number one question that we get from everybody. And it's the number one question that we get actually from even CEOs of banks and financial institutions. And I believe personally, the dollar has a very sound future. One of the things that people don't realize about blockchains like Ethereum is that after Ether or Bitcoin, the number one asset that people want to buy on these blockchains are US dollars. The US dollar token in various different forms is the most popular asset because lots of stuff is priced in dollars. We know what things are valued are in dollars, right? Yes, it's perfectly legal for you to hold Swiss francs or Nigerian naira or Japanese yen in your wallet, and you can buy stuff with them. But when you walk down the street and you want to buy a cup of coffee, you think, how much is that in dollars or whatever your national currency is? And people want to transact in dollars and euros and yen on the blockchain, and those are going to continue to be foundational currency. So I think investment bankers, central bankers who worry that their national currencies will be overtaken by a cryptocurrency are probably worried too much about that.
Yeah. Paul, we touched on this a few minutes ago, but we're getting this question a lot, so I'm going to ask it a different way. And actually, Michael in the stream is asking it. He says, how do I protect my NFTs from scammers?
That's a really good question. I feel like this is one of the areas where the world of blockchain is least mature. So first of all, take some time, do some research. The most important thing is have a proper blockchain wallet set up, either a custodial account, this is where somebody else holds the account for you, or a private account that you control. And if you control that account, think carefully about things like two-factor authentication, how you store your secret information. There are indeed lots of scammers out there. There are also some very good guides to protecting yourself. And although there are some incredibly sophisticated attacks, the truth is, and we see this over and over again in our forensics practice and in our security team, the vast majority of thefts in the digital world and the crypto world happen because people forgot to do basic things like carefully store their passwords, set up a two-factor authentication tool that isn't dependent on the cellular network, that uses something like a Google or a Microsoft authenticator or a multi-signature wallet. So there are lots of tools available, and even a modest investment of your time reading up on the options and picking one that works for you will protect you from 98, 99% of the attacks. And if you have something that's worth millions of dollars, then absolutely go pay a professional to help you set up some good security.
Yeah. As you have said several times now, Paul, there's a lot of education to be had in this space. And, just speaking for myself, I certainly encourage our viewers to read up and make sure they're protected anytime they enter this market. Let's say hello to a few others in the stream. Jacqueline from New York, Peter from California, Marco from Mexico, and from Florida. Thank you all for joining us. Remember, you can put some of your questions into the stream, and I'll do my best to pose some of them to Paul. Paul, while we have you, let's talk a little bit about that underlying blockchain technology and where things stand there. A lot of people say that there hasn't been that much adoption or application in their everyday life, or at least that they can see, of blockchain technology. Where do you think we are in the adoption and evolution of that distributed ledger or blockchain technology?
So I sort of think about adoption as having sort of 3 or 4 phases. The first is what I'll call the early enthusiasm, right? This is the initial phase. People discover the technology and they get wildly overexcited about it, right? It can solve all of our problems and make better coffee too. Then we have like what's often called the valley of despair, where we discover that all these things we wanted to do are harder than we thought. And we've just spent about 2 or 3 years in that valley of despair. And I'll give you a very good example. Privacy in the world of blockchain originally just wasn't very good. And it took us a long time to figure out how to do some level of privacy. Once you solve those problems, you get to what I think of as a tipping point where solutions work, where people get excited, and the rocket ride of adoption starts. So we're at that point now, right? And I think very importantly, we also have some clear standards. So the world of blockchain has 2 big blockchains, Bitcoin, which is now worth more than all the other blockchains, and Ethereum, which has more software developers than all the other chains. And in the same way that we have just 1 or 2 operating systems in PCs and mobile devices, right? Once you get to that level of consolidation and adoption, the rocket ride can go up really fast because people start to understand, like, if I pick this platform and I join it, it's going to be okay. There's going to be a long future ride upwards.
Paul, we touched on this maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago, so let's go back to it because Barbara in the stream is asking, if I'm not in the art industry, what other industries or applications are NFTs being used in right now?
So we are using NFTs in a bunch of different ways. We're using them for medical equipment, right? So if you think about an MRI scanner, and we work with a marketplace in Canada where they sell used medical equipment, right? A used device, right? Whether it's your car or an MRI device is different from a brand new one because of how it's been used and how it's been maintained. So any item that's in a class and is unique, but not not completely separate from other things. You can have a whole class of non-fungible tokens. This is how we see them being used. We're using them to track lots of vaccine. We're using them to track food. We just put into production a system with a big Italian beer maker where each time they complete a batch of beer, they mint a new NFT to record that batch of beer and the history of it, and you'll be able to look it up and see that the ingredients were organic, when it was made, where it was produced, and that kind of thing.
Now, Paul, because this is LinkedIn, we see a lot of people in the stream wondering how they can, maybe consider working in the blockchain industry or in the blockchain space. What do you suggest, the skills that people acquire or the courses that they look into, or what degrees are most appropriate for a career in this space where you have made your own career?
So like everybody else who's thinking about this, I started with zero experience. In fact, my undergraduate degree is in economics with a certificate in African studies. So I'm clearly well qualified for a tech job. What I would recommend to people is a couple of things. First of all, learn some Solidity programming. It's the main programming language for the Ethereum blockchain. And what I tell a lot of folks is I don't expect and I don't hire most of the people to be programmers, but just a little bit of knowledge about how these things work is incredibly powerful when you're standing in front of a client or working with a colleague or trying to fit out a solution. And you can be so much more credible if you have some experience and you can understand what the challenges are and the mechanics are. So that's one really important thing. And then the second thing is, we sort of look for T-shaped skills. So in the sense that people have a bit of knowledge about a bunch of things, and then they're extraordinarily good at one thing. And so, for example, at EY, we do a lot of accounting and auditing. So if you're an auditor who also knows blockchain or Bitcoin, that's a really great skill. If you are an expert in SAP implementation and you also understand how tokens made, then you kind of have the ideal skill set to say, okay, I know how the ERP system inside the company manages inventory, and then I know how we would represent that inventory on a public blockchain if we were going to deploy it as a digital token. So those are the kinds of intersections that we're looking for. And it's not about any one course. It's about having a combination of blockchain and cryptographic knowledge with some deep subject matter expertise around business process or information technology.
Paul, you mentioned something earlier that really caught my ear. You said dozens of CEOs of large companies are coming to you and asking, what they should be thinking about as it relates to blockchain technology and adoption of it in their own companies. What would you say the number one question that you get from CEOs is about this technology?
Number one question is, how is using something on a blockchain different from a more traditional technology system? And the answer to that is that blockchains are fundamentally decentralized. And so in a traditional centralized technology system, you have a central market operator or network operator, and those operators become very, very powerful. We've seen this over and over again over the years, right? A company builds a marketplace, whether it's ride sharing or retail marketing or something else, and they become extraordinarily powerful. And as they become more powerful, right, network effects and the economics of the software business mean that we have this tendency towards a small number of very, very big players. And they can start to change the terms of business. They can look upon how people are interacting with each other, and they can change how things work to their advantage. The beauty of blockchain and the real attraction of blockchain is there is no central controlling entity. And because there's no central controlling entity like the internet, no one can surprise you with a change of the rules or upending the kind of balance in the marketplace or deciding that they want to change your fees or anything else. And so the appeal of doing business digitally in a blockchain environment is the knowledge that you could interact with this ecosystem on your own terms, and you won't wake up one day to discover that you are a minor player in somebody else's centralized digital ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a fascinating technology. We're seeing that adoption pick up across industries, as you said. Paul, I really want to thank you for your time today. Our members really enjoyed hearing your perspective on these issues.
Thank you for having me.
That was Paul Brody, Global Blockchain Leader at EY. Now, don't forget to join us tomorrow on LinkedIn News Live. We'll be discussing overcoming Zoom fatigue, speaking with a Stanford professor who authored that study on how all of this Zooming is hitting our emotional state. I'm Devin Banerjee. Thank you again for watching LinkedIn News Live.